I really prayed about what the Lord would have me share, and I felt as though it was essential that we talked and revisited the passage of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the battle of Gog of Magog. We often say the battle of Gog and Magog, which is how it's worded in Revelation. That's actually a different battle that takes place at the end of the millennium, but this passage here, this battle, in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is something that takes place prior to the return of Jesus. And so for anyone who has been studying prophecy for any amount of time, you're probably quite familiar with this passage, but I want to look at it afresh. I believe that this is one of the most essential Old Testament passages. I believe this is, if I can use the phrase, the Armageddon of the Old Testament. And even in saying that, there's probably some red flags that go up, but we're going to really look at the passage, and I believe this message will be a bit of all three of the Berean and the Issachar as well as the applicational. And I believe that this passage has a lot of all of the above. So what I've done here is I've just made a timeline so you can see what I call the popular view. And this is the view that most of us were raised on, that we've seen in most of the books that are discussing this and the teachings that most teachers are teaching, which is essentially that in terms of that final week, that final 7 years prior to the return of Jesus and the Battle of Armageddon, at either just before or just after that period, you have what's called the Battle of Gog of Magog. This is what most are teaching, that it begins, it's an event that's very brief, and it takes place just prior or sometime just immediately after the beginning of that 7-year time frame. And then it's taught that these armies, this invasion is thwarted, that it's supernaturally destroyed, and that this opens the way for the coming of the Antichrist. So how many have never heard this scenario? So pretty much everybody in here is on board. I want to look at this and see if this holds up against the criteria of Scripture. I really want to look at the passages and say, is this scriptural? I mean, this is widely held, widely believed. It's almost orthodoxy. I mean, don't even touch this view. Now, I want to begin by just highlighting the fact that the Jewish view, that the rabbis and sages down through history have always looked at Gog of Magog not as a preliminary, penultimate invader of Israel, but rather the ultimate final enemy of the people of God. The Jewish view has always been that this is the final, not the secondary, as opposed to the Christian view, the popular Christian view. And I'm actually going to argue for this particular view, the Jewish view, that Gog of Magog is simply another retelling of the Antichrist story, and that Gog is the Antichrist, and this invasion spoken of by Ezekiel is the same story that all of the other prophets are talking about. Now, granted, they're all emphasizing different aspects of the story. Some are using a wide-angle lens, some are using a fisheye, some are focusing on this or that, but they're all basically telling a very Day of the Lord centric story. It's a story that very much revolves around the return of Jesus and the events that precede His coming. And Ezekiel is no different than any of the other prophets.